Hi, Mustangs. My name is Miss Garvey, and I am going to start reading Chapter 55. Chapter 55, A Stone Squirrel. When he was finished, Flora's mother stood over his shoulder, reading and nodding and saying, "That's right, that ought to do it. There are a few misspellings, but then you're a squirrel. Of course you're going to misspell things." She lit another cigarette and leaned against the kitchen table and considered him. "I guess it's time," she said. "Wait here. I'll be right back." And he did as she said. He waited. She left the kitchen and he simply sat there, unmoving. It was as if she had put a spell on him. It was as if typing the lies, the wrong words, had depleted him of all ability to act. Once, long ago, in a garden in springtime, Ulysses had seen a squirrel made of stone, gray, hollow-eyed, frozen. In his stone paws, he held a stone acorn that he would never get to consume. That squirrel was probably in the garden now, still holding that acorn, still waiting. "I am a stone squirrel," thought Ulysses. "I can't move." He looked over at the words he had typed. They were untrue words. Several of them were misspelled. There was no joy in them, no love. And worst of all, they were words that would hurt Flora. He turned slowly. He sniffed his tail. And as he sniffed, he remembered the words that Flora had shouted at him in the giant donut. "Remember who you are. You're Ulysses." This helpful advice had been followed by a single powerful word: act. He heard the sound of footsteps. What should he do? What action should he take? He should type. He should type a word. But what word? No more typing. Chapter 56, Kidnapped. She woke with a start. The house was incredibly dark, so dark that Flora wondered if she had gone temporarily blind. "Ulysses?" she said. She sat up and stared in the direction of the door. Slowly, the rectangular outline of it appeared, and then she could see that it was ajar. "Ulysses?" she said again. She got out of bed and went down the darkened stairs and past the little shepherdess. "You stupid lamp," she said. She made her way into the kitchen. It was empty. The typewriter was unmanned, or unsquirreled. "Ulysses?" said Flora. She walked over to the typewriter and saw a piece of paper glowing white in the dim light. "Uh-oh," she said. She leaned in close. She squinted. "Dear Flora, I am terribly fond of you, but I hear the call of the wild, and I must return to my natural habitat. Thank you for the macaroni and cheese. Yours, Mr. Squirrel." Mr. Squirrel? Call of the wild? Terribly fond? It was the biggest lie that Flora had ever read in her life. It didn't look like Ulysses had written it at all. Only at the very end did the truth appear. 2 letters, F and L. That was Ulysses, she knew, trying to type her name one last time, trying to tell her that he loved her. "I love you too," she whispered to the paper. And then she looked around the kitchen. What kind of cynic was she, whispering "I love you" to a squirrel who wasn't even there? But she did love him. She loved his whiskers. She loved his words. She loved his happiness, his little head, his determined heart, his nutty breath. She loved how beautiful he looked when he flew. She felt her heart seize up. Why hadn't she told him that? She should have said those words to him. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was finding him. Flora hadn't been reading the criminal element for 2 solid years for nothing. She knew what was going on. The squirrel had been kidnapped by her mother. She took a deep breath. She considered what to do, what action to take. In the event of a true and genuine emergency, an absolute and undeniable crime, the authorities must be notified immediately, said the criminal element. Flora was certain that this was a true and genuine emergency, an absolute and undeniable crime. Still, it didn't seem like a good idea to notify the authorities. If she called the police, what would she say? "My mother kidnapped my squirrel?" The criminal element. If for some reason the authorities are not accessible to you, then you must seek help in other quarters. Whom do you trust? Whom do you know to be a safe port in a storm? Flora suddenly remembered her dream, how warm William Spiver's hand had felt in her own. She blushed. Whom did she trust? Good grief, she trusted William Spiver. Chapter 57, Tootie to the Rescue. It was 2:20 a.m. The grass was heavy with dew. Flora was picking her way through the darkness. She was breathing heavily because she was carrying Mary Ann in her arms, and Mary Ann, for all of her pink cheeks and delicate features and excessive, stupid frilliness, was incredibly heavy. Talk about stout, thought Flora. The criminal element. Can one reason with a criminal? This is debatable, but it is true that the rules of nursery school are often in good effect in the criminal world. What do we mean by this? We mean that if the criminal has something you want, then you must have something he wants. Only then is it possible for some kind of discussion to begin. There was nothing and no one that Flora's mother loved more than the lamp. Together, Flora and William Spiver would find her mother. They would offer to exchange the little shepherdess for the squirrel, and then all would be well, or something. That was Flora's plan. But first she had to find William Spiver, and she didn't think that it would be a good idea to ring Tootie's doorbell at 2:20 a.m. William Spiver? Asked Flora. Here she was, standing in the dark, holding an unlit lamp and hoping that a temporarily blind boy would hear her call his name and come help her rescue her squirrel. A squirrel who, for a superhero, sure did seem to need a lot of rescuing. Things were pretty grim. William Spiver? She said again. William Spiver? And then, without really intending to, she started saying William Spiver's name over and over, louder and louder. William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver. There was no way he would be able to hear her, of course. She knew that. But she couldn't make herself stop. She just stupidly, idiotically, hopefully kept saying his name. Flora Bell? William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver. Flora Bell? William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver. Flora Bell? And there he was, standing at a darkened window, conjured apparently by her need and her desperation, and her words, William Spiver, or at least the shadow of William Spiver. Oh, said Flora. Hello. Yes, hello to you too, said William Spiver. How lovely of you to visit in the middle of the night. There's been an emergency, said Flora. Right, said William Spiver. Just let me put on my bathrobe. Flora felt a familiar prick of irritation. It's an emergency, William Spiver. There's no time to waste. Forget about your bathrobe. I'll just put on my bathrobe, said William Spiver, as if she hadn't said anything at all, and I'll be right there. Wherever there is. It was shockingly difficult to locate even the most obvious things when no one is temporarily blind. The world is very hard to navigate when you can't see. Although, to be perfectly frank, I had trouble navigating the world even before the advent of the blindness. I've never been what you would call coordinated or spatially intelligent. It's not even that I bump into things, it's more that things leap out of nowhere and bump into me. My mother says that this is because I live in my head as opposed to living in the world. But I ask you, don't we all live in our heads? Where else could we possibly exist? Our brains are the universe. Don't you think that's true, Flora Bell? I said it's an emergency. Well, then I'll just put on my bathrobe and we'll sort it all out. Flora put Mary Ann down on the ground. She looked around wildly in the darkness. What was she looking for? She didn't know. Maybe a stick that she could use to hit William Spiver over the head? Flora Bell? Ulyssess is gone, she screamed. My mother kidnapped him. I think my mother is possessed. I think she might hurt him. Do not cry, she told herself. Do not cry, do not hope, do not cry, just observe. Shh, said William Spiver. It's okay, Flora Bell. I'll help you. We'll find him. And then the light in William Spiver's room came on, and Tootie said, "What in the world are you doing, William?" "Looking for my bathrobe." "Tootie to the rescue." The words appeared above Tootie's head in a neon kind of brightness. "Tootie," shouted Flora, "it's an emergency." "My mother has kidnapped the squirrel." "Flora," said Tootie. She stuck her head out the window. "Why do you have that awful lamp?" "It's complicated," said Flora. "Again with the lamp?" said William Spiver. "What in the world is the meaning of the lamp?" "My mother loves the lamp," said Flora. "I'm holding it hostage." "Desperate times call for desperate measures," said Tootie. "That's right," said Flora. "It's an emergency." "I'll just get my purse," said Tootie. Chapter 58, Nothing Personal. It was dark, very, very dark, and there was the smell of smoke. Flora's mother had him in a sack, and the sack was flung over her back, and she was walking somewhere, and it was very, very dark. At the last minute, Flora's mother had picked up the piece of paper with his poem on it and thrown it into the sack along with him. Was this meant as a kindness? Was she mocking him? Or was she merely covering her tracks? The squirrel didn't know, but he held the crumpled ball of paper to his chest and tried to comfort him. He thought, "Worse things have happened to me." He tried to think of what they were. There was the time the pickup truck had run over his tail. That had hurt very much. There was also the incident with the BB gun and the teddy bear and the garden hose, the slingshot, the bow, and rubber arrow. But everything that had happened before paled in comparison to this, because there was so much more to lose now. Flora in her round and lovable head, cheese puffs, poetry, giant donuts. Shoot! He was going to leave the world without ever having tried a giant donut. And Tootie! Tootie had said that she was going to read poetry out loud to him. That would never happen now, either. It was very dark in the sack. It was very dark everywhere. "I'm going to die," thought the squirrel. He hugged his poem closer, and the paper crackled and sighed. "This is nothing personal, Mr. Squirrel," said Flora's mother. Ulysses held him very still. He found this sentiment difficult to believe. "It really has nothing to do with you," said Flora's mother. "It's about Flora, Flora Belle. She is a strange child, and the world is not kind to the strange. She was strange before, and she's stranger now. Now she is walking around with a squirrel on her shoulder, talking to a squirrel, talking to a typing flying squirrel. Not good, not good at all." Was Flora strange? He supposed so. But what was wrong with that? She was strange in a good way. She was strange in a lovable way. Her heart was so big, it was capacious, just like George Buckman's heart. "Do you know what I want?" said Flora's mother. Ulysses couldn't imagine. "I want things to be normal. I want a daughter who is happy. I want her to have friends who aren't squirrels. I don't want her to end up unloved and all alone in the world." "But it doesn't matter, does it?" "It does matter," thought Ulysses. "It's time to do what needs to be done," said Flora's mother. She stopped walking. Uh-oh, thought Ulysses.